The cameras went dark the moment she should have died. Her name is Helen McCarthy, a 62-year-old Walmart worker from Kansas who was standing just 10 feet from the shooter. Every witness saw him aim. Every officer confirmed he fired. But when investigators reviewed the footage, there was no sound, no image, just 3 seconds of static. When the video returned, Helen was still there, untouched, whispering a prayer she doesn't remember saying. The gunman's weapon lay on the floor beside him. No one has ever explained what happened in those missing seconds. You won't believe what happened to her after that moment, and how it changed everything she thought she knew about fear, faith, and survival. Before we continue, please take a second to like this video and subscribe. It helps these true stories of faith reach more people who need hope today. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let's go back to that day inside the Walmart where the impossible interrupted fear itself. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled wet, a soft, metallic scent that clung to everything as the clouds pressed low over Kansas. The Walmart parking lot was quiet, except for the sound of wheels rolling through puddles and the low hum of trucks on the highway beyond the field. Helen McCarthy crossed the slick asphalt with her coffee and canvas tote, her blue vest folded neatly over her arm. Her car, a small silver Corolla with one rusted door, clicked twice as she locked it. She paused before going in, watching the reflection of the glowing sign ripple across the puddles. It felt like every morning since her husband died, steady, gray, and somehow smaller than it used to be. Inside, the air was cold and bright, the smell of wax and cardboard mixed with the faint sweetness of air fresheners from Seasonal. The automatic doors sighed shut behind her, sealing her into the familiar rhythm of morning shifts she'd worked for 12 years. She clocked in without looking at the screen, slid her tote under the counter, and pushed her supply cart down the quiet main aisle. The overhead speakers played a country ballad from decades ago, something her husband would have whistled off-key. She caught herself mouthing part of the chorus, then stopped. She began stocking shelves in her section, paper towels, disinfectant, wipes, toilet tissue. Her knee ached as she knelt to open a box with a utility knife. The scanner in her vest pocket beeped softly, steady as breathing. She liked that sound. It gave the day shape. Her phone vibrated once, a text from her daughter. "Can't come this weekend. Too much overtime." Helen stared at it, thumb hovering over the reply button, then turned the screen dark and slipped it back into her pocket. She worked in silence, adjusting labels, smoothing shelf edges, counting units. At one point she paused, pressing her palm to her knee, and stared at the aisle floor until her focus blurred. A customer thanked her for restocking bleach. Another asked for paper plates. The small ordinary exchanges carried her through the afternoon like stepping stones. By 4 o'clock, the storm clouds outside had darkened the skylights, making the ceiling lights shine harder, almost sterile. The store's usual sounds, the chatter, the carts, the scanner beeps, folded into one low hum. She moved down the aisle slowly, refacing the last of the disinfectant sprays, when a sudden metallic clang broke the rhythm. It came from somewhere past sporting goods. She froze, straightened, listened. Another sound followed, sharper, louder. A deep echo rolled down the long row of aisles. It didn't sound like something falling. It didn't sound mechanical at all. A woman screamed near the front, and for 1 second, the entire store seemed to stop breathing. Then another burst, distinct, unmistakable, cracked through the air like it had torn something invisible apart. Someone shouted, "He's got a gun!" Helen's breath caught. The words came again from another voice, closer this time, high and panicked. The next moments blurred, carts slamming, shoes scraping, a bottle rolling off a shelf and bursting on the tile beside her. She dropped to her knees, instinct before thought, pressing herself behind a pallet of paper towels. Her radio buzzed, someone saying something about lockdown, but the voice was lost under the chaos. She could hear crying, hurried footsteps, another dull pop that echoed into silence. She peeked around the corner of the shelf. A man stood 2 aisles over, visible for only a second through the space between displays. He was moving strangely, shoulders jerking, shouting at no one she could see. His arm was raised, and something dark and angular flashed under the lights before he disappeared deeper into sporting goods. She ducked back, heart hammering. The store music had cut out. replaced by a faint electrical hum and the quick rhythm of people trying not to make noise. Her phone showed no service. She gripped the small silver cross pinned to her vest, the metal digging into her palm. Her thoughts narrowed to one simple repetition. Please, please, please. She pressed her back against the shelf and tried to listen past the ringing in her ears. Somewhere, a child whimpered. The smell of lemon cleaner from a broken bottle filled the air, stinging her throat. The gunman's voice echoed again, hoarse, unsteady, shouting fragments that made no sense. Words about lies, about no one hearing him, about God. His footsteps pounded closer, then stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound. Helen shut her eyes. Time stretched thin. The flickering lights above her seemed to dim all at once, and in that dimness, a faint glow began to form at the far end of the aisle. It was soft, not bright, but alive somehow, golden, steady, pulsing like breath. The glow spread gently over the shelves, touching the white paper rolls until they shimmered faintly. In that light stood a man. She couldn't make out his features, only the calm shape of him, motionless, unafraid, his outline warm against the cold fluorescent glare. He didn't move toward her, he only stood there, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet but certain. "You are not alone." Her mouth opened, but no sound came. The light flickered once, then vanished, leaving her kneeling in the familiar dull brightness of the store. The hum returned. Somewhere distant, another shout, "He's running!" And then heavy footsteps. She stayed still, her palm pressed to the floor, the crosspin warm in her hand. Outside, sirens began to rise, winding through the wind and rain, growing louder, closer. The air around her smelled of dust and lemon, of fear and something else she couldn't name. She looked down the aisle to where the light had been and whispered a small word of thanks she didn't fully understand, as if whoever had been there could still hear her through the noise. The sirens swelled closer, a trembling sound carried on the wind, echoing through the concrete walls until it seemed to vibrate in the very air of the store. Helen stayed low for a moment longer, unsure if it was over or just beginning again. Her knees ached from the tile. Her fingers, still clutching the cross pinned to her vest, had left small crescents of red where the edges had pressed into her skin. Around her, the long aisle looked both familiar and foreign. The same rows of bleach and paper towels, but changed somehow, as if the air itself now carried a memory she couldn't name. She rose slowly, one hand gripping the metal shelf for balance, and looked down the length of the aisle. The light that had filled it before was gone, replaced by the stark, flat glare of the fluorescents. Everything smelled of lemon and smoke. She heard a man's voice shouting somewhere near the front, firm, urgent, police or maybe security. Another voice answered, then the heavy thud of footsteps. Someone yelled, "Clear!" and the words echoed, sharp and hollow. Helen began to move. Her shoes slipped slightly on the wet floor, and she steadied herself, whispering, "It's all right, it's all right," though she didn't know whether she was speaking to herself or someone else. But what she saw when she turned the corner would stay with her for the rest of her life. At the far end of the next aisle, two police officers in dark uniforms were crouched, weapons drawn, their movements careful but certain. One gestured forward, the other leaned around the display, flashlight beam cutting through the mist of the sprinkler haze. Behind them, near the electronics section, a man lay face down, motionless, his duffel bag beside him, the handle of a black handgun visible where it had slid across the tile. The sight didn't shock Helen the way she might have expected. It simply stilled her. The world around her seemed to pause, the radios, the dripping water, the officers' voices, as if sound itself had stepped aside for a moment of silence. She didn't move closer. She didn't want to. One of the officers glanced her way and raised a hand, palm out, signaling her to stay back. She nodded, already frozen in place. She could smell the faint odor of gunpowder mixed with the sour tang of cleaner. Her heartbeat slowed, not from calm, but from the strange, heavy quiet that comes after fear. The officer said something into his radio. Another pair of boots hurried past. The lights reflected off the wet tile, scattering tiny sparks of white across the puddles. Helen's eyes followed the reflections instead of the body, unable to look longer than a second at what lay there. A few customers were gathered near the rear exit, trembling, whispering prayers or fragments of sentences that didn't quite make sense. One woman clutched a child so tightly the boy began to cry again. Helen wanted to go to them, to help somehow, but her legs felt hollow. She reached instead for her cart, the same cart she'd been using just minutes earlier, and gripped its handle until her fingers stopped shaking. A store manager appeared beside her. It was Mike, his shirt half untucked, face pale. "Helen, you okay?" he said, breath quick and uneven. "I think so," she answered. Her voice didn't sound like her own. "Is everyone—" He nodded too fast. "They're clearing it. Just stay here until they tell us." He started to move away but hesitated, looking back once. "You sure you're all right?" She managed a small nod. "Yes, just waiting." He left, radio pressed to his shoulder, vanishing behind the towering stacks of merchandise. Helen stood alone again. The sprinklers had stopped, leaving behind only the faint dripping from the ceiling and the smell of damp cardboard. The sound of voices faded in and out, police giving orders, someone crying softly, another employee saying, "It's over now," like a question more than a statement. The air felt thicker, heavier with humidity. A light flickered above her head, buzzing faintly. She rubbed her arms, though the store was warm, and walked toward the edge of her aisle, stepping around the broken bottle of cleaner. Her reflection followed her in the wet floor, each step leaving a darker print that disappeared as quickly as it formed. She found Gloria crouched near the end cap, tears streaking her powdered face. Helen knelt beside her, joints stiff. Gloria looked up, eyes wide and red. "He was right there," she whispered. "He came out of nowhere. I thought we were done for." Helen took her hand without thinking. "It's over," she said quietly. "They're here now." Gloria nodded, still trembling, her lips moving in a silent prayer. Helen held on until the woman's breathing steadied. A loudspeaker crackled, someone saying the store was secure, that everyone should stay in place until escorted out. Helen leaned back against the shelf, closing her eyes for just a moment. But what she didn't know yet was that her calm would draw attention later, that the way she moved through that chaos without screaming or running would make people ask her what she'd seen. When she opened her eyes again, a faint shimmer of light caught the corner of her vision. It wasn't bright like before, only a pale reflection rippling across the water pooled under the shelves. It trembled, steadying for an instant, forming something almost cross-shaped before fading back into shadow. She blinked, unsure if it had been real or just a trick of the lights. She touched the cross on her vest, warm from her hand. Officers began moving people toward the exits in small groups. The wet floor squeaked under their shoes. Helen guided Gloria forward, hand on her shoulder. The doors slid open, and cold air rushed in, fresh, alive, smelling of rain and diesel and the faint sweetness of wet asphalt. Blue and red lights flashed across the parked cars, painting everything in pulses of color. Outside, she could see the shape of the man's car still idling by the curb, door open, a bag on the front seat. Police tape fluttered like ribbons in the wind. Helen didn't look too long. She led Gloria toward a paramedic who was handing out blankets. Someone wrapped one around her shoulders, its wool scratchy against her neck. Another officer asked her name, her role, whether she was hurt. She answered automatically, voice low, eyes drifting again toward the store doors glowing behind her. No one could have imagined what she had seen in that moment. The crowd thickened as more people were led out, employees, shoppers, even the greeter, his usual smile replaced by a blank stare. A news van had already pulled up near the sidewalk, its camera trained on the entrance, but Helen didn't notice. She stood in the drizzle, staring at the lights reflected in the puddles, watching them blur and reform with every passing second. A paramedic offered her water. She took it, hands still shaking slightly, and said thank you, though she wasn't sure if the word came out. When she finally looked up, she saw that the rain had returned, soft and slow, falling through the colored lights like silver dust. She tilted her face toward it, letting a few drops cool her skin. The air smelled clean again, the kind of clean that feels alive. Somewhere inside the building, a generator hummed as power flickered back to normal. The sound reached her through the open doors, a low vibration, almost like breath. She didn't know why, but she found herself whispering one more time, "Thank you." She stood there until the crowd thinned, until the sirens quieted and the mist began to settle. When a police officer finally asked if she needed a ride home, she shook her head. "No, I'll manage," she said softly. He looked at her for a moment, then nodded and walked away. Helen turned once more toward the building. The automatic doors had closed again, the world behind them quiet, sealed, unreal in the distance. For a moment she thought she saw a faint light flicker across the glass, as if someone inside was walking with a lantern through the empty aisles. She didn't blink this time. She just watched it fade, slow and steady, before she turned and began walking toward her car, each step measured, her reflection stretching long across the wet pavement as the rain kept falling in the quiet. Rain streaked the windshield of Helen's Corolla as she drove through the slow, shimmering lines of traffic leaving the parking lot. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual, though she barely noticed. The wipers dragged rhythmically across the glass, pushing away the thin mist that kept returning, as if the air itself refused to let the moment clear. Police lights still flared in the mirrors, red, blue, softening in the rain until they looked like reflections of a distant storm. The road ahead was dark except for the golden wash of headlights, and the tires hummed a constant note on the wet asphalt. She didn't speak. The only sound in the car was her breath and the quiet slap of the wipers. Her body still trembled, but in a way that felt internal, hidden beneath the skin. She could still smell the faint lemon cleaner on her hands. Every few seconds, her eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see flashing lights following her, though none came. She turned off the main road onto Maple Street, where the street lights were fewer and dimmer. Houses passed by, windows glowing in warm amber, curtains drawn, lives going on as if the world had not shifted an inch. But what happened next would test everything she thought she understood about peace. When she pulled into the narrow driveway of her duplex, the rain softened to a whisper. The porch light was still on, casting a pale halo over the welcome mat. She parked, cut the engine, and sat for a while, hands still on the wheel. The silence inside the car was thick, like the air before a prayer. Her reflection in the dark window looked older than it had that morning. The crosspin on her vest gleamed faintly in the dash light. Inside the house, everything was in order, just as she'd left it. Coffee mug by the sink, lamp on the table, her husband's photograph standing straight on the dresser. The air smelled faintly of laundry detergent and rain. She turned on the small kitchen radio out of habit, but the sound of voices, reporters talking about the incident she had just survived, made her turn it off again. She didn't want to hear it from someone else's mouth. She walked into the bathroom, washed her hands slowly, watching the pale foam swirl down the drain, then touched her face, almost checking if it was still her own. At 8, there was a knock at the door. She hesitated, glancing through the window before opening it. A uniformed officer stood outside, young, soaked, his notebook damp in his hand. "Ma'am, sorry to bother you," he said, his voice quiet but clipped. "You were listed as one of the employees in aisle 12, correct?" Helen nodded, her hand tightening on the door frame. "Yes. I just need to confirm a few details for the report," he continued, stepping slightly under the porch to avoid the rain. "You're okay? No injuries?" "I'm fine," she said. "Just tired." "I understand." He looked at her for a moment, the kind of look people give when they don't have words big enough for the thing they're standing near. "You saw him, right?" "Only for a second," she said. "I didn't see his face." He nodded, jotting a note. "We'll handle the rest. There's a counselor available tomorrow if you'd like to speak with someone. It's part of protocol." "I'll think about it," she said. He hesitated again, as if something else wanted to leave his mouth, then adjusted his cap. "We're just glad you made it out." She thanked him, closed the door gently, and stood there for a long moment, her forehead against the cool wood. Across the street, lightning flickered without sound. The faint glow lit up the raindrops on her porch rail, turning them into small sparks for a heartbeat before darkness took them back. She exhaled, long and slow, then walked into the living room. Her knees ached as she lowered herself onto the couch. The room was dim except for the small lamp beside her husband's photograph. She stared at the frame. His smile looked the same as it always had, steady, knowing, faintly amused at her for all the worrying she did. "Don," she whispered. The name barely left her lips. "You tell me what to make of this." But only the hum of the refrigerator answered. She sat still, the fabric of the couch pressing gently into her hands. Outside, the wind rattled the rain gutter. The ordinary sounds of life, plumbing, passing cars, distant laughter, felt too clean, too normal after what she'd seen. She closed her eyes and the scene from the store replayed without permission, the golden light spreading through the aisle, the man's voice saying she wasn't alone. It hadn't been a dream. The light had touched everything, every bottle, every tile, even her hands. She could still see it when she blinked. At that moment she realized something else. The fear she should have been drowning in had ebbed away. It wasn't gone, but it no longer ruled her body. What replaced it was quieter, steadier, like the soft vibration of an engine idling somewhere beneath her ribs. Her phone buzzed again, a message from her daughter. "Mom, I just saw the news. Are you okay? Please call me." She stared at the words, her thumb hovering over the screen. Then she pressed the call button. The ringing seemed to stretch forever before a voice broke through. "Mom?" "I'm all right," Helen said. "I'm home." "Oh, thank God," her daughter breathed out. "They said it was at your store. Her voice cracked. "I thought you—" "I know," Helen said softly. "It's all right now." "What happened?" Helen hesitated. She could hear the sound of her daughter's children in the background, cartoon voices, small feet on hardwood. "Someone came in with a gun," she said finally. "The police got there fast. It's over now." Her daughter was silent for a moment. "Do you need me to come? I can take a few days." "No," Helen said. "Stay with the kids. I'm fine." She paused, then added, "I really am." They talked a little longer, small words about safety and news coverage and the Lord's protection. Then the call ended with a long, quiet goodbye. Helen lowered the phone and set it on the armrest. But what she hadn't told her daughter, the part she couldn't yet speak, was that she'd seen something no news anchor would ever mention. The light, the voice, the presence. It was too real to doubt, but too sacred to describe. The refrigerator motor clicked off. The house sank into a deep, soft silence. Helen leaned back, closed her eyes, and listened to the steady rhythm of rain outside, each drop distinct against the roof. The memory of the man's voice returned, quiet and steady. "You are not alone." Her eyes opened again. A reflection of the streetlight outside moved across the window, pale and wavering. For a moment it bent into the shape of a cross on the curtain before dissolving. She didn't move, afraid the slightest motion would break whatever invisible thread tied her to that piece. And then, so faint she almost doubted it, the smell of lemon cleaner drifted through the room. Not sharp as before, but clean and warm, almost sweet. She inhaled once, twice, steadying her breath, feeling the air fill her chest. She thought she heard something else within that silence, not a voice this time, but a sense, like being watched over, held, understood. The clock on the wall ticked softly, the sound like a heartbeat in the stillness. The storm outside began to fade. Helen rose, walked to the window, and pressed her hand lightly to the cool glass. Raindrops streaked down, catching the orange glow of the streetlights until they looked like tiny trails of fire sliding toward the earth. She watched them merge and disappear, her reflection faint and transparent in the pane. No one could have imagined how this night would change her. She stood there a long time, hand against the glass, her breath fogging the surface until it blurred her reflection completely. When she turned away, the faint scent of lemon was still there, following her like a whisper as she walked down the hallway toward the quiet of her bedroom, the floor creaking softly under her feet, the air still holding the memory of light. ChatGPT Skazal. The house was quiet except for the sound of rain easing into drizzle, the water on the roof slowing until it became a soft ticking that faded between gusts of wind. Helen lay awake for a long time, her eyes tracing the dim outline of the ceiling, the faint yellow glow of the streetlight reaching through the curtains like a patient breath. The events of the day drifted through her mind, not as clear pictures, but as sensations. The smell of lemon, the hum of the lights, the voice that had spoken to her with such calm certainty it left no room for doubt or fear. She turned onto her side and looked toward the chair near the window where her husband's jacket still hung, its fabric worn smooth on the elbows. For years, she'd thought of Faith as something distant, like a star too far away to light her house, but tonight it felt closer, gentler, like the air itself had remembered her name. The rain stopped altogether, and the silence that followed was deep and warm. She rose, wrapping her blanket around her shoulders, and walked barefoot to the window. The street outside glistened under the lamplight, the wet asphalt reflecting the faint halo of the bulb. A neighbor's porch light flicked on, and she could hear the muffled laughter of someone getting home late, keys jingling, a door shutting, a life continuing. Helen pressed her fingers against the cool glass and whispered something she didn't plan, just a simple thank you, as natural as breathing. But what she didn't know was that at that very moment, across town, one of the customers she had helped to the exit hours before was kneeling by his bed, saying her name aloud in prayer, thanking God for the woman who had guided him through the chaos when his legs refused to move. In the stillness that followed, Helen felt something inside her loosen, like a thread untangling. The fear that had lived quietly beneath every day, the fear of being alone, of being forgotten, was gone. In its place was an awareness that she could not explain, only feel, that she had been seen, that she was part of something much larger than the aisle she'd hidden behind, larger even than her own sorrow. She returned to bed and pulled the blanket up to her chin. The sheets were cool, the air smelled faintly of rain and soap, and somewhere beyond the house, a train's low whistle rolled through the night, long and steady, fading into distance. Her lips moved once more, the smallest echo of the words she had heard in the store, a quiet answer to what had been spoken. I know. Dawn came gray and peaceful, clouds moving apart like a curtain lifting. Helen made coffee, the rich smell filling the kitchen, and opened the back door to let in the morning air. A sparrow hopped onto the porch railing, shook the water from its feathers, and sang 3 quick notes before flying off into the light. The simplicity of it, the ordinary continuation of life, made her eyes sting. She sat down with her cup, felt the warmth against her palms, and smiled. For the first time in years, she did not ask for proof or understanding. She simply accepted that love had found her in a place where fear had tried to close every door. The miracle was not in the light itself, but in how it had changed the way she saw everything after. Sometimes grace arrives quietly when the noise of the world has exhausted itself. Sometimes peace comes not to explain the storm, but to remind us that we never faced it alone. What Helen carried from that day was not the memory of fear, but the sound of a voice that had spoken straight into her trembling silence and left her steady again. Let us pray for those who still seek light in their darkest moments, for those who carry fear like a second heartbeat, and for every soul waiting for the quiet hand of peace to rest upon them. May the Lord open their eyes to the ways He moves unseen through ordinary places, the aisle of a store, the corner of a home, the hush before dawn. May He remind them that no heart is too tired, no day too broken to be touched by His mercy. Grant them the courage to forgive themselves, the strength to endure what cannot yet be changed, and the faith to recognize His voice even in the smallest whisper. Let those who walk in darkness learn again to trust the morning. Amen. If this story has touched your heart, take a moment to think of the people who have carried you through your hardest hours. Share their names in the comments, or tell us about a moment when you felt God reach you in the ordinary. If you believe someone needs this reminder today, send it to them, so they too can remember they are not alone. And if you've ever found light where you least expected it, tell us your story. We read everyone with gratitude. Thank you for watching. God bless you. And may the peace that found Helen in that quiet, trembling aisle find you too, wherever you are tonight, softly, like light returning after rain.